The rooftop of the Meridian Grand glittered 40 floors above the city. White orchids cascaded from crystal vases. Champagne flutes caught the light like tiny flames. 100 of New York's most powerful people stood in their finest clothes, watching the man they all feared and respected stand at the center of it all. Calm, composed, untouchable. Adrian Cole was 38 years old, worth $11 billion and blind. Had been since a car accident 6 years ago had stolen his sight on a rainy Tuesday evening outside his own office building. He never spoke about it. He never had to. The world simply adjusted around him, the way the world always adjusts around men with money. Please subscribe, like, and comment where you are watching from. He stood at the podium now with a microphone in one hand and the other wrapped around the waist of Vanessa Hale, who smiled the kind of smile that photographers loved. Wide, warm, practiced. She wore a champagne-colored gown that matched her hair, and she leaned into Adrian with the ease of a woman who had spent months perfecting the angle. The press had already named them New York's most romantic story. A billionaire CEO, blinded and broken, rescued from isolation by a devoted woman who loved him not for his money, she always said, but for his strength. The crowd applauded when Adrian spoke. His voice was steady, low, the kind of voice that filled rooms without effort. 6 years ago, he said, I lost something I thought I could never replace. But Vanessa found me in the dark. And she became my light. Another wave of applause. Vanessa pressed her cheek to his shoulder. Someone in the crowd actually sighed. No one noticed the young woman in the back corner. She was carrying a tray of champagne flutes. Her uniform was pressed but plain, white button-up, black skirt, dark hair pulled back tight. She had the careful, invisible presence that good waitstaff train themselves into, the kind of stillness that lets them move through crowds without disturbing a single conversation. Her name was Lila Reyes. She was 26 years old. And the moment she heard Vanessa Hale's voice drift across the rooftop, Lila's hands went completely still. The glasses on the tray did not rattle. But only barely. She knew that voice. Lila stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, the tray balanced in her hands, her eyes locked on the woman at the podium. Vanessa was laughing now at something Adrian had said, her head tilting back at just the right angle. Lila's jaw tightened. That laugh. That specific musical laugh, always a half-second too late, always just slightly too loud. She had heard it before. In a different city. Under very different circumstances. In a room where someone who didn't deserve what happened to them had their life ruined while that laugh played in the background. Lila drew one slow breath and made herself keep moving. She crossed the rooftop, refilling glasses, nodding at guests, doing her job. But her eyes never fully left Vanessa Hale. 20 minutes later she saw it. The party had settled into the comfortable rhythm of expensive celebration. Small groups talking, soft jazz threading through the conversations, waitstaff ghosting between clusters of guests. Vanessa was across the room from Adrian, who was seated at a private table with his assistant and 2 board members. She was speaking to a group of women near the bar, all of them laughing. And then just for a second Vanessa's eyes moved. They swept the room, not randomly, not socially, but with intent. She found someone. A man near the far railing, heavy-set, gray suit, holding a drink he hadn't touched once in the last 40 minutes. Their eyes met. Vanessa's fingers moved at her side. 3 taps against her thigh, quick and deliberate. The man gave the smallest nod. And then Vanessa looked away, back to her group, back to her laugh, like nothing had happened at all. Lila had seen the whole thing. She kept her face neutral. She moved to a service station near the wall and set down her empty tray with a soft click. Her heart was hammering. She had spent a long time learning to notice things other people missed. Body language, timing, the small transactions of deception that people thought were invisible. And what she had just seen was not nothing. It was communication. Careful, coded, deliberate communication between a woman who was supposed to be in love with the man 20 feet away and a man who was supposed to be a stranger. She watched the rest of the party from the edges. By 10 o'clock the heavy-set man was gone. Vanessa had returned to Adrian's side, slipping her hand into his, pressing her lips to his jaw for a camera that was conveniently nearby. Lila stood near a pillar watching, and what she felt was not just suspicion. What she felt was certainty. Because she had seen Vanessa Hale do this before. Not this exact thing. Not the engagement, not the billionaire. But the pattern. The way Vanessa moved through spaces like a chess player who had already decided the outcome 3 moves ago. The way she made sure everyone was looking at exactly what she wanted them to look at. Lila knew it, the way you know a smell before you can name it. Deep in the gut, cold and clear. And then she heard it. She had moved close to the terrace edge, gathering empty glasses, when Vanessa stepped around the corner of a stone partition about 6 feet away. She was on her phone. Her voice was low, fast, barely above a whisper. But the rooftop was quiet here, away from the music and the night carried sound. It has to be done before the ceremony, Vanessa said. Pause. The documents are already drafted. Marcus has them. Once the wedding is done, everything belongs to me. The company, the accounts, all of it. Adrian won't see it coming. A short laugh, the same musical laugh, now stripped of every trace of warmth. He literally can't. The phone clicked off. Lila did not move. She stood with a tray of empty glasses in her hands, and the city hummed 40 floors below her, and everything was suddenly very, very clear. She had 2 options. She could walk away. Finish her shift, take her $40 in tips, go home, and let Adrian Cole marry a woman who was going to take everything from him. That was the safe choice. That was the choice that kept her out of rooms she had fought very hard to stay out of. Or she could do the thing that every nerve in her body was screaming at her to do. Lila set down the tray. She spent the next 3 minutes convincing herself it was the wrong move. She spent the next 30 seconds walking across the rooftop toward Adrian Cole's table anyway. His assistant saw her coming and straightened, the automatic suspicion of someone paid to manage access. Lila didn't slow down. She picked up a wine bottle from the nearest table, a good Bordeaux half full, and held it up like a credential. "Compliments of the kitchen," she said smoothly. "For Mr. Cole." The assistant relaxed by 1 degree. Lila moved past him and leaned toward Adrian, lifting the bottle to refill his glass. She was close to his ear. Close enough to speak without being heard 3 feet away. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice steady, keeping her hands steady, keeping every muscle in her face neutral. "Your fiancé is lying. I saw everything." Adrian Cole did not flinch. He did not turn his head. His expression stayed exactly as it was, composed, unreachable. But something happened in the line of his jaw. A tightening, barely visible like a door locking. His fingers, resting on the table, went still. "I don't know what you think he started. She was on her phone 10 minutes ago," Lila said. Terrace sighed behind the partition. "She said the documents are already drafted. Someone named Marcus has them. She said once the wedding is done, everything belongs to her." 1 second. 2 seconds. "Sir." A hand landed on Lila's shoulder. Firm, pulling. "The assistant. I'm going to have to ask you to." "It's fine." Adrian's voice was quiet, but the assistant stopped immediately. Then, after a pause that felt much longer than it was, "Thank you for the wine." It was a dismissal. Lila straightened. She had 2 seconds left, maybe 3, before she was escorted off the floor. Her hand moved without her fully deciding to move it. She reached into the pocket of her apron, closed her fingers around the small object she had been carrying for 6 days, and pressed it into Adrian's palm where it sat open on the table. His fingers closed around it reflexively. And then Vanessa was there. She had materialized from somewhere to Adrian's left, and her eyes found Lila with a precision that made the air feel thin. The warm smile was still on her face, but it didn't reach anything behind it anymore. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice soft, pleasant, dangerous. "Nothing," said the assistant. "This waitress was just..." I saw her leaning over Adrian. Vanessa's eyes stayed on Lila. "Is there a problem?" "No problem," Lila said. "Good." Vanessa's smile held. "Because I'd hate to think someone on the staff was trying to make a scene at our engagement party. For attention." She let the words sit there. Then she turned to the assistant. "Please have her escorted out." The assistant's hand was on Lila's arm before she could say another word. She let herself be moved. She didn't fight it, didn't protest, didn't look back. She walked to the service elevator with her head straight and her hands loose at her sides, and the doors closed in front of her, and she stared at her own reflection in the steel and breathed. It was done. Whatever happened next was out of her hands. She told herself that. She almost believed it. Adrian Cole sat in the back of his car 2 hours later, long after the last guest had gone, long after Vanessa had kissed him goodnight and been driven home to her apartment uptown. His assistant rode in the front. The city moved past the windows. Adrian's hand rested in his lap, and in it, small and smooth, was the object the waitress had pressed into his palm. He turned it over with his fingers. Flash drive. One of the slim ones barely larger than a thumb. No label. He hadn't told his assistant about it. He didn't know why exactly, except that something in him had shifted during those 2 seconds at the table, and the part of him that had built an $11 billion company by reading people, by listening, by measuring the weight of what people said against the weight of what they didn't say, that part was very, very awake right now. He told his driver to take him to the penthouse. He plugged the drive into his laptop at midnight, sitting alone at his desk with the city spread out behind the glass. The file that opened was an audio recording. 63 seconds long. He pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the room. Not the public voice, not the warm, curated voice he had known for 18 months. The other one. Stripped and purposeful. The recording had been made 3 days ago from the sound quality somewhere indoors, maybe a restaurant. She was talking to a man. Marcus, probably based on what the waitress had said. The power of attorney document gets signed the morning after the wedding, Vanessa said on the recording. Adrian's lawyers are already working around it. Marcus, I need the amendment filed before they catch it. Once it's in place, he can't touch the company without my sign-off. Full board access. Full account access. We move everything within 6 months and he won't even know what happened until it's too late. The recording ended. Adrian sat in the dark for a long time. The thing about losing your sight is that you develop a ferocious relationship with your other senses. You hear things other people don't hear. You learn to feel the temperature of a room, not the air but the people. You develop a near physical sensitivity to the way someone's voice changes when they're performing versus when they're not. Adrian had spent 6 years sharpening those instincts to a point that sometimes felt like a different kind of sight. And now, sitting in his office at midnight with Vanessa's recorded voice still echoing off the walls, he thought about every moment of the last 18 months. He thought about the specific way she guided his hand, always in front of people, always subtly staged. He thought about the conversations she steered, the meetings she inserted herself into, the slow, patient way she had positioned herself between him and his board, between him and his legal team, between him and the world. He had thought it was love. He had thought she saw him, really saw him, where other people only saw a liability. He sat with that for a while. And then he made a decision. He would not confront her. Not yet. He would not call his lawyers, not alert his security team, not do any of the things that instinct was pushing him toward. Because Vanessa was careful and smart and she had been building this for a year and a half. And if he moved too fast she would see it coming and cover her tracks and he would have nothing but a 63-second audio recording and the word of a waitress no one would believe. No. He would do what he had always done when someone underestimated him. He would let them keep underestimating him. What Vanessa Hale did not know, what no one in Adrian's life knew except his surgeon, his personal physician and one trusted board member who had signed an ironclad NDA, was that 3 years ago in a clinic in Zurich an experimental procedure had given Adrian Cole something back. Not full sight. Not the way it had been before. His left eye remained completely dark. But his right eye had recovered enough to detect light, shapes, faces at close range. He could read large text if the contrast was high. He could see a person's expression if they were within 10 feet. It was imperfect, partial, and completely invisible to anyone looking at him, because Adrian had made the decision in the recovery room in Zurich to keep it that way. He had kept the dark glasses. He had kept the white cane for formal public appearances. He had kept every accommodation his office had made. Not out of deception or not only that, but because he had learned something in those years of blindness that sighted people never got to learn. People reveal everything when they think you can't see them. Every pretense drops. Every mask loosens. And in a world where $11 billion made you a target, the ability to watch people who believed they were unwatched was worth more than perfect vision. He had seen the signal on the rooftop tonight. He had caught the edge of it, Vanessa's hand at her side, the tap of her fingers, too deliberate for a nervous habit. He had seen the man at the railing. He had been turning it over in his mind even before the waitress reached his table. And now he had confirmation. Adrian picked up his phone. He did not call Vanessa. He called Daniel Firth, his head of corporate security, who answered on the second ring despite the fact that it was past midnight. "I need everything you can find on a man named Marcus," Adrian said. "Connected to Vanessa Hale. Start with her contacts from the last 2 years. Pause. And I need you to find the waitress from tonight. Lila, I think. She worked the rooftop event at the Meridian. What do you need from her? Adrian thought for a moment. I don't know yet, he said. Just find her. The next week moved slowly from the outside and at a dead sprint underneath. On the surface, everything was exactly as it had been. Adrian and Vanessa had dinner twice. She came to his office once, sat through a board meeting with the composed attention of someone learning a business out of love. She touched his arm at the right moments. She laughed at the right volume. She was extraordinary at the performance, and Adrian watched her from behind his glasses with his limited, careful, secret sight, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a cold, quiet fury that had nowhere to go yet. Daniel found Marcus inside 48 hours. Marcus Teal, a disbarred attorney from Boston who had reinvented himself 3 times under variations of the same name, moving from city to city just ahead of fraud investigations. His connection to Vanessa went back 4 years. They had run a similar operation once before, against a wealthy tech executive in Philadelphia who had lost his company in a divorce proceeding that turned out to be engineered from the start. The executive had never been able to prove it. The case had been closed. Vanessa and Marcus had walked away clean. Daniel also found Lila Reyes. He brought her file to Adrian's office on a Wednesday morning. Adrian sat behind his desk and listened as Daniel laid out what he had found. Lila Reyes, age 26. Worked 3 jobs, all in hospitality. No criminal record. Associate's degree in paralegal studies. No social media presence to speak of. Originally from Trenton, New Jersey. And in Trenton 4 years ago her older brother, a freelance accountant named James Reyes, had been accused of embezzling from a client company. He had lost his career, his apartment, and 18 months of his life to a legal fight he couldn't afford before the charges were eventually dropped for lack of evidence. The client company's lead officer at the time of the accusation? A consulting firm whose records listed Vanessa Hale as an operational partner. Adrian sat with that for a long moment. She wasn't a random waitress, he said finally. No, said Daniel. She wasn't. On Thursday, Adrian told Vanessa something that made her eyes light up in a way that had nothing to do with love. He told her he had decided to sign over a 30% stake in Cole Industries to her name. A gift, he said. Before the wedding. A gesture of full trust. He wanted her to have financial security that was entirely her own, not dependent on the marriage. He could hear the careful control in her breath as she responded, the almost imperceptible delay before she said softly that he didn't have to do that. He told her he wanted to. He said the signing would happen 2 days before the ceremony. He held her hand while he said it, and his right eye, behind the dark glass, watched her face arrange itself into something that looked like being moved to tears. By Friday, Daniel's team had logged 3 meetings between Vanessa and Marcus Teal. One in a cafe on West 54th, one in a parking structure in Midtown, one in a hotel lobby in the financial district. All of them photographed. All of them recorded from a distance with directional audio equipment. The recordings weren't perfect. Ambient noise, distance, interference, but they were enough. Enough to hear Marcus say on the Friday recording, once the 30% transfers, we freeze the amendment filing and move to Plan B. Enough to hear Vanessa say, Adrian has no idea. He never will. Adrian listened to the recordings in his car on the way home. He did not change his expression. He told his driver to take the long route. The morning of the wedding was clear and cold, the sky a hard bright blue over Manhattan. The ceremony was at the Whitmore Estate in the Hudson Valley, an hour north of the city. 240 guests. 12-piece orchestra. A florist who had flown in from Paris and charged accordingly. Vanessa arrived in a private car and was escorted directly to the bridal suite, where her team spent 3 hours making her look exactly like what she was performing. A woman deeply, radiantly in love. In the groom's suite down the hall, Adrian sat alone for 10 minutes before his assistant came to check on him. He was still. Completely still, the way he got when he was thinking at his deepest level. On the table beside him was a tablet. On the tablet was a file. He had read it 3 times. He knew every word. He put on his jacket. He put on his glasses. He walked out into the corridor. The ceremony began at 1 o'clock. The orchestra played something soft and golden as Vanessa walked down the aisle, And the room responded the way rooms respond to beautiful women in expensive dresses. A collective inhale, 240 people leaning slightly forward. She reached the altar and took Adrian's hands, and her smile was perfect. The officiant began to speak. The usual words, the ancient rhythm of ceremony, the call and response of promises. Do you, Vanessa Hale, take this man? Before she answers. Adrian's voice. Quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. The officiant stopped. The room went very, very still. Vanessa's smile flickered, just for a half-second, just enough for someone paying close attention to catch it. Adrian, she said softly. What? I want to play something for our guests, Adrian said. He reached into his jacket and produced a small remote. Around the room, four speakers that his team had installed that morning, disguised inside floral arrangements, came to life simultaneously. And Vanessa's voice filled the Whitmore estate. Once the wedding is done, everything belongs to me. The company, the accounts, all of it. Adrian won't see it coming. The room erupted. Not into sound, into silence first, the kind of silence that precedes a storm, when everyone is still processing what their ears just told them. Then the whispers started, cascading through the pews like a wave. Vanessa's face had gone a color that her makeup couldn't cover. She dropped Adrian's hands. That's not. She looked at the guests, then at Adrian, then at the exits, the calculations running visibly behind her eyes now that there was no more point in hiding them. That's taken out of context. You don't understand what that. Marcus Teal has been arrested, Adrian said calmly. This morning. Federal fraud charges, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, falsification of legal documents. His full agreement with you is part of the filing. He reached up with one hand. His fingers found the frames of his dark glasses. He removed them slowly and set them on the altar railing. And then he looked at Vanessa Hale, directly, clearly from 3 feet away, with the right eye that could see her face and everything written on it. The color drained out of her completely. I may have been blind once, Adrian said. His voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. But I see you clearly now. What happened next moved fast. It always does, when something that has been constructed over years comes apart in minutes. 2 federal agents who had been stationed near the estate entrance moved into the room with the efficient calm of people who had done this many times before. Vanessa took 1 step backward, then stopped, because there was nowhere to go, and on some level she must have known it. She let them cuff her without resistance, her jaw set, her eyes straight ahead. She walked out of the ceremony room between 2 agents in front of 240 witnesses and a photographer who was going to earn his entire year's salary from the pictures he took in the next 30 seconds. The room erupted the moment she was through the doors. Adrian stood at the altar alone and let the noise wash over him. His assistant appeared at his elbow and said something he didn't quite catch. He nodded anyway. It was over. And it wasn't even 2 o'clock. By the following morning, the story was everywhere. Every major outlet, every financial news channel, every gossip site and legal blog and corporate watchdog publication. Billionaire CEO exposes fiancée's fraud conspiracy at the altar. The blind man who saw everything. The photos were extraordinary. Vanessa in her dress, the agents at her sides, Adrian at the altar with his glasses off and his expression made of stone. The story wrote itself, and it wrote itself for days. Adrian did not read the coverage. He stayed at his penthouse, took calls from his board and his lawyers and worked. He was good at that. He had always been good at that. On the 4th day he asked Daniel for Lila Reyes's address. She lived in a 4th-floor walk-up in Queens. Adrian arrived unannounced, which he knew was a choice he would need to answer for. He stood in the hallway and knocked twice and waited. When the door opened and Lila Reyes looked at him, still in her jacket from what he guessed was the end of a shift, dark circles under her eyes, clearly not expecting him, Adrian took his glasses off and held them in his hand. You could have told me who you were, he said. What your real connection to her was. Lila looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned against the door frame and said, Would you have believed me if I had? He considered that. No, he said honestly. Probably not. I needed you to hear her voice first, she said. Not my story. Her voice. He nodded slowly. That was exactly right. That was the decision she had made, and it had been the correct one, and he respected it in the specific way he respected very few things. Genuinely, without qualification. Your brother, Adrian said. James. The charges that were dropped. There's enough in what we pulled from Marcus Teal's records to file a civil suit. To clear his name formally, not just technically. My legal team can handle it if he wants. Something moved through Lila's expression. Quick, guarded, then something behind it that was much less guarded. She didn't say anything for a moment. That's not why I did it, she said finally. I know, Adrian said. That's why I'm offering. She looked at him. He looked back at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the hallway was quiet, and the city made its distant constant sound below. There's something else I want to offer you, Adrian said. A position at Cole Industries. Head of Internal Oversight. New division. I'm building it from scratch. It's for someone who knows how to watch. Who knows what to look for. He paused. Someone who notices what everyone else misses. Lila was quiet for a moment. I don't have the credentials for something like that. You have the only credential that matters, Adrian said. You walked into a room full of billionaires and said what needed to be said when no one else would. She looked at him for a long time. And then very quietly she said, I'll think about it. It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no either. And Adrian, who had learned to hear everything in the spaces between words, understood that it was something more complicated than either answer. He nodded once, put his glasses back on and turned toward the stairwell. Mr. Cole, Lila said behind him. He stopped. The recording I gave you, she said. I made it 6 days before the engagement party. I was already inside. I'd gotten the catering job on purpose. But there's a second recording. From 4 months earlier. She paused. Vanessa and Marcus weren't the only people involved. There's a third person. Someone closer to you than either of them. Adrian's hand tightened on the stairwell railing. Who? He said. His voice was completely level. Lila was quiet for 2 full seconds. Someone on your board, she said. Someone who's been there for 7 years. The name she said next hit him like a physical thing. He stood very still in the stairwell of a queen's walk-up 40 floors below the world he lived in, and the city went on making its noise outside, and somewhere in his penthouse a recording he hadn't heard yet was waiting for him. His hand stayed on the railing. His breathing stayed even. His face stayed composed. But his mind was already moving. Because the truth, it turned out, had only been half told. And the woman no one had noticed, the waitress in the corner, the one the room had looked right through, was the only person who knew where the other half was buried. The door to Lila's apartment was still open. Adrian turned back around slowly. Tell me everything, he said.